Here we are at belief number 10. By now you probably are seeing some changes in your life, but the basic problem, a lack of self-confidence and the need to be accepted by others, is not yet totally gone. And I promise you, it will be totally gone by the time you're done with this program. Now, even if the process for eliminating beliefs may seem a little repetitive, you have to do every step in order to eliminate each separate belief. So stay with it. Please continue to answer each question out loud to make sure the belief is eliminated. This next belief is a belief that almost always accompanies the first belief you eliminated: mistakes and failure are bad. This belief is, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Here's one way to know if you have this belief. Are you worried about what people might think of you or how they'll react to you if you make a mistake or fail? That concern is probably the result of the belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. As you'll see when we get to the source of this belief, if you had the original belief, mistakes and failure are bad, and most of our clients do, you almost certainly have this belief. In any case, it's important to at least be open to the idea that you might have a belief like this, because if you have it, it's most likely holding you back in some areas of your life. It's one of the most important beliefs causing your lack of self-confidence and your concern with the opinion of others. And when you get rid of it, I promise, life will get better. Although this belief might sound like it's the same as mistakes and failure are bad, it's not. It's possible to eliminate that belief and still hold this one. In many cases, we form several beliefs from essentially the same events. Also, remember you can hold a belief that intellectually you don't think is true about you. Today as an adult, you might know that if you make a mistake or fail, you won't be rejected. But just knowing that isn't enough to eliminate the belief. Ultimately, the way to know if you have this belief is the same way to know if you have any belief. Say the words out loud and pause for a moment. If the words feel true, even a little bit, you have the belief. Okay, try it right now. Please say, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, out loud, and then be still for a moment. Does it feel even the slightest bit true? If it does, you have the belief. You now know what it feels like to say these words when you have the belief. You'll say the same words out loud at the end of the process, and will experience what the same words feel like when you no longer believe the statement. Okay then, let's get rid of, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Based on our experience with thousands of clients, I can honestly say that most people who lack the self-confidence to do what they really want to do have this belief. When you find the source of this belief, you'll understand why so many people have it. But if you're absolutely certain that you don't have this belief, please click Next Belief and proceed to the next belief. Don't forget, though, that if you do have the belief, you could be missing out on the opportunity to get rid of it forever. And if you do believe it even a little bit, and you don't get rid of it, you probably won't be able to significantly improve your sense of self-confidence and your need to be accepted by others. My voice will now stop, so you can write down this belief in the text box on your computer monitor. Click Continue when you're ready to continue with the process to eliminate the belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. The next step to eliminate a belief is to figure out when you formed it. Most of our beliefs, certainly almost all of our self-esteem beliefs, were formed from events involving your parents that occurred when you were a very young child. Remember, a belief doesn't come from a single incident, but from many similar interactions. And when it's a very broad belief like, I'll never get what I want, or a belief about oneself like, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, it's always formed from experiences we've had with our parents when we were very young. Why are the beliefs always formed in interactions with our parents? Because during the first few years of life, we're trying to understand who we are, and we use how our parents treat us as information. If I'm criticized frequently or yelled at, and it feels as if my parents are withdrawing from me, What does that mean to a 5, 6-year-old child? If I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Most parents just don't realize the impact of their words and behavior on their children. And that's why most of us form negative beliefs from our interactions with our parents, even though that's not what they intended at all. By now it should be clear that in most cases our parents loved us, and they didn't have much parenting training. They had some of their own beliefs that were affecting their parenting, and they had some unreasonable expectations. Given all of that, we formed a lot of beliefs in our childhoods that are having a negative impact on us later in life. It's not our parents' fault. They did what they did, and we gave their behavior meaning, which we can eliminate now. Okay? For most people, the source of this belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, is mom and dad's annoyance or anger when we don't do what they want, when they want it, or the way they want it, and we experience them withdrawing from us. When mom and dad were angry at you, did you feel closer to them or more distant? Anger almost always makes people feel more distant. So for you as a young child, what did it mean when your parents suddenly felt more distant? That they were withdrawing from you. And why were they withdrawing? Because you had done something wrong. You had made a mistake or failed. Now take a look at your early life and see where the belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, comes from for you. Then type into the text box on the screen the type of things your parents did and said in your childhood that led you to form the belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Rather than writing down how you felt about it, describe the actual situations, what your parents actually said and did, such as, my parents often got annoyed or angry at me when I didn't do what they wanted me to do, and I felt rejected. Take the time you need because this is important. When you're done writing, click Continue. Now the program will pause. Look at the events you've written down. Is it clear to you that the conclusion you reached, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, is a valid interpretation of those events? Can you agree that virtually any child at that age and in those situations would have reached a similar conclusion? Now we're going to play the possibilities game. We'll imagine that 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. That is one valid interpretation of mom and dad's behavior. Any child in that situation would have concluded what you did. It made sense. But there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you didn't think of as a child. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Can you see that one friend might well say, if I had been there at the time and had asked your parents, why did you just reject your child? They might have said, what do you mean? I didn't reject my child. I was just angry. Couldn't, your parents didn't reject you, they were just angry, explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? Here's what your second friend says. Maybe you were rejected by your parents. That doesn't necessarily mean the other 6.5 billion people on the planet would reject you too. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? Here's a third possible interpretation of your childhood events that one of your friends suggests. How about this? You were rejected because you didn't do what your parents wanted you to do, not because you made a mistake or failed. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? Your childhood interactions with your parents could have lots of meanings. Here's one your fourth friend suggests. Your parents' reaction to you had nothing to do with mistakes or failure. Their reaction was a function of their own beliefs and circumstances at the time. By the way, the founders of Google are going to start their own schools because they need to hire people who are willing to make mistakes and fail. And kids coming out of school nowadays are afraid to do that. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain your childhood interactions with your parents just as well as your interpretation? If I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? Of course they can. So is it real to you that a belief you've lived with almost your entire life, something you thought was a fact, is not a fact? It's not the truth at all. It's only a truth, merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of childhood events, right? Please continue to interact totally with this program in order for it to work, and that includes answering my questions out loud, even if your answer is only yes or no. So let me repeat the question. So is it real to you that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected is not a fact, is not the truth, but just a truth, merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of childhood events? I'll bet you do now. With a little help from me and your friends, you can see that the earlier events associated with your parents' annoyance, when you didn't do what they wanted, how they wanted you to do it, or when they walked away in anger or became distant, could have at least 4 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief? If I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Look at the text box below on your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Take a few minutes and really imagine the events of your childhood that led you to the formation of the belief, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense that you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief, if I made a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, you probably did feel it. Now, I'll get back to the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. Didn't it seem as if you saw, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? As if you could point to it. As if you could have said to me, Morty, can't you see if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? I didn't hear you. Did you say yes? Remember what I explained when you were eliminating the earlier beliefs. What happened was that you looked at events that could have had many different meanings and chose one, which in this case was, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events, you attributed the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. Now that you think you saw, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, as a child, I'd like you to look again. Did you really see, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? If you did, what does, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, look like? Can you really point to it? Does, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, have a color, a shape, location? Is it real to you now you saw events, but never really did see, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? If anything you can really see can be described, and if you can't describe what, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, looks like, is it clear now that you never really saw it? Since you never really saw, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, what did you actually see? Is it clear now all you really saw was the reaction of one or both of your parents when you did something they weren't happy about, and you noticed you felt rejected? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events. You see, what happened was that you looked at a series of events that can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events, you attributed the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. Remember, it's not that what happened didn't matter. It just had no meaning. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you attributed one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. When I say that, I'm saying you don't know anything for sure about you, about other people, or about life as a result of these experiences. Imagine that I called you up and told you that when I was a kid and I did something my parents didn't like, they either were annoyed or angry, and I usually felt that they were withdrawing from me. Other than knowing what happened to me when I was a child, would you know anything for sure about how others would treat me in the future if I made a mistake or failed? Is it clear that you wouldn't know anything about me? And if you don't know anything about me, you don't know anything for sure about how people will treat you in the future either. All you know for sure is what actually happened. Your mom and dad sounded annoyed or angry, and perhaps punished you when you didn't do what they wanted you to do, when they wanted you to do it, and you felt rejected. And finally, if you never saw, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected out there in the world, where's it been all these years? Did I hear you say that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, has only existed in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. Now, if the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior and comments when you were a child made you feel that if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? It did, didn't it? But you just agreed that the events have no meaning. Is it possible for events that have no meaning to make you feel, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, or anything else for that matter? Of course not. So if mom and dad's behavior couldn't have made you feel, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, what did make you feel that? By now I think you know the answer to that question. Please answer out loud. That's right. You felt that only because that's the meaning you had already given to your parents' behavior. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child and had shown you the alternative interpretations for your parents' behavior. And after that conversation you concluded, I might feel rejected, but I'm not really being rejected. Here's what I'd like you to do now. Take a moment and really imagine being a child, and mom and dad get annoyed at you for something you did or didn't do. As you imagine the events, apply this different interpretation to their behavior. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, I might feel rejected for the moment, but I'm not really being rejected. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make this childhood scenario more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, does it still feel like your parents' words and actions are making you feel, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected? Probably not. And if you didn't feel, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected then, would you feel it now? Again, the answer is no. So mom and dad's behavior never caused you to feel, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they're only the result of a meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that the feelings you had when your parents were annoyed or angry didn't tell you anything at all about whether or not you'd be rejected if you made a mistake or failed? They didn't, did they? Okay, now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected. Is it the truth? Does it still feel like the truth? Your answer is very important here. Don't forget that we form beliefs to give meaning to events that have no real meaning. Having done that, we then think we observe the meaning in the events, out there in the world. It becomes a fact for us. Once we realize that the earlier events never had any real meaning, that the meaning was only in our minds, that it was never a fact, that the feeling we had was caused by the meaning we gave meaningless events, the belief disappears forever. Take another deep breath and say, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, out loud, I'll bet it feels very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning of this exercise. Do the words feel true, even a little bit? Unless the belief is 100% gone and the words don't feel true at all, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. If the belief is still there, it probably still seems like you saw it. Once it no longer seems as if you saw, if I make a mistake or fail, I'll be rejected, in those early events, the belief will be gone. So please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. If the belief is gone, please click continue. Totally, and you just did it in about 20 minutes. Amazing! Because behavioral and emotional problems are caused by several beliefs, getting rid of several will lessen a problem, but probably not eliminate it totally. So you probably will have to get rid of all 19 of the beliefs and the 5 conditionings on this program that you actually have before your lack of confidence and your concern with the opinion of others disappears totally. But as a result of getting rid of this belief, the little voice that criticizes what you do will become a little quieter. Your self-doubt will decrease somewhat. You'll be a little less concerned with what others think of you. Before you move on to the next belief, you might want to revisit the process, who am I really? In fact, I'll keep reminding you after you eliminate each belief. It enables you to feel that you're the creator of your life. You experience on a very profound level that anything is possible and you have no limitations. I found that after getting myself into that state many times, I started to experience that freedom and power inherent in that state almost all the time without even having to do the process. When things happen, instead of feeling like a victim, I begin thinking, I wonder what I believe that has this happening again. It's very empowering. Now you can either click Who Am I Really?, click Next Belief to get rid of another belief, or close this program. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return and resume the program.